Good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to leave it for about 30 seconds just for everybody to join, and then we'll start the session. Okay, let's get started. I think we've got quite a few participants in already. So good afternoon to our panelists and our delegates who have joined us for the 4th Solar Power Africa 2021 webinar. And it's run in conjunction with the South African Energy Storage Association. And this particular webinar is sponsored by Longi. I'm Neil Piper. I'm the head of content for Messi Frankfurt, South Africa, and I'll be hosting the webinar today. The webinar will be addressing extended producer responsibility with the theme transitioning from polluter pays to producer pays principle. We've assembled a really good lineup of speakers, a powerful lineup of speakers, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And I'm sure you guys are going to provide insight and share your EPR expertise and provide an opportunity for questions that will provide further clarity wherever needed. Just a few house rules. Please post your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. The questions will be reviewed and addressed at the end of the webinar in our Q&A session. And if we can't get through all the questions, we will answer the questions post the webinar on the Solar Power Africa website. A recording of the webinar will also be made available in due course. It is now my pleasure to welcome our esteemed panelists today. Joanne Dean, she's a board member and spokesperson for the South Africa Energy Storage Association. Patricia Schroeder, the founder and director of Urban Elements. Michelle Govender, Chief Director, Hazardous Waste and Management and Licensing from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. Naveshan Govender, the Chief Operating Director at SAPVIA, representing 170 members through the value chain of solar PV market segments. Lindo Sibaya, the Strategic Programs Manager of SAWIA. Kevin Robinson, the Senior Technical Sales Manager of Longi Solar. And last but not least, Keith Anderson, the Chairman and CEO, E-Waste Association of South Africa. Welcome, all of you, and thank you for all of your efforts in preparing for today and for being part of this. As an introduction to the webinar, Solar Power Africa is South Africa's premier exhibition and conference for the solar, PV, and energy storage markets, with SAPVIA as its main endorsing association. Solar Power is scheduled to take place as a hybrid event from the 16th to the 18th of February next year at the Cape Town International Convention Center, with a core emphasis focused on the live element. For more information, please head to solarpowerexpo.co.za for more information and to book your spot. Solar Power is a joint venture between Messi Frankfurt, Set Solar, who organize Solar Power International, SPI, North America's largest show for the solar and related sectors, and Schneck, the organizers of the largest solar power show in the world. Messi Frankfurt is the 3rd largest trade fair company in the world, with an established operation in South Africa, and it has over 10 trade and consumer fairs in its portfolio. Okay, introductions done. Let's get to it. First on our virtual stage, I'd like to now welcome Joanne Dean, board member and spokesperson for CSA. Welcome, Jo, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And from a SAISA perspective, a great big thanks to Mr. Frankfurt and the team for making this conversation happen today. And then for Tulongi, the true champions in the green energy space, for powering this webinar. And then most of all, thank you to our esteemed presenters for sharing time with us. And then obviously the most important key people here, to our delegates. Thank you for attending. A difficult but important conversation is extended producer responsibility, or more termed EPR, which is based on the polluter pay principle. This entails making manufacturers responsible for the life cycle of the projects they produce. The difficult conversation is that the aim of EPR policies is to internalize the environmental costs of the products into their price. Another is the shift to the economic burden of managing these products that have reached the end of use life from local government to protect producers and consumers. The interesting fact, just for today, back for today, the concept of EPR was first formally introduced in Sweden by Thomas Lindhqvist, and this was in 1990. So the conversation we have here has evolved over time, and it is an important one. Our call here today is to all the O&Ms and manufacturers and producers on this call that to embrace this conversation. Responsibility is an environmental protection strategy to reach an environmental objective of a decreased total environmental impact from a product by making manufacturers of the product responsible for the life cycle and the take back and the recycling. But this will enable the industry as extended champions of green. So without further ado, let's give our avid attention to our phenomenal presenters on this stage and the information that they're going to share. Because although I said this is a difficult conversation, it's one that we should embrace because it's all inclusive of what we can actually do to make a change in South Africa. Thank you.
Joe, thank you so much. And yeah, just a big thank you to you for all your efforts. It's been really such a pleasure dealing with you over the last few months. And I know that you've got the best interests of the industry at heart. So thanks for everything that you've done for us and for the broader industry. And on that note, I'd like to welcome Navesh and Govender, who's here on behalf of SAPIA to address their involvement in EPR. And Navesh, always good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today, and over to you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Neil. And thank you to Joe for setting the scene. I think she said a lot in those few minutes. For those of you who don't know me, and as I've been introduced, my name is Navesh Govender. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of SAPIA, the Solar PV Industry Association, representing just over 540 members across the value chain of solar PV. Our key aim is to lobby government for more renewable energy participation in the energy mix. I'd like to thank the organizers, Massive Frankfurt, for the session, which will cover the regulatory changes around how we deal with renewable energy waste. A very big thank you to the Department of Forestry, Fishery and the Environment for sharing their time to unpack these regulations and discuss the impact that we will have on renewable energy products. I encourage the sector to pay careful attention to the requirements laid out in the regulations. We need to act responsibly and ensure a sustainable future for renewable energy components. As an industry association, SAPIA has an environmental working group headed by Patricia, who you will hear from later on in the program, on the different options available to the sector with regards to waste management. I think as an industry, we must carefully consider the options and make decisions that will best address the industry's needs while adhering to the stipulated requirements of the regulations. We must ensure that we look at all the economic opportunities to encourage more local participation. A well thought out approach and combined with good planning could yield far greater results collectively. With that, I hope you all enjoyed the session today. We do have plans at SAPIA to engage our members post the session via the appropriate working groups to devise a way forward and a plan going. Thank you.
Navesh, thank you so much. And as always, it's great to have you on these webinars. Again, everything that you do for the broader industry, and there's so much change happening at the moment. It's really good of you to make the time to join us today. So thank you so much, Navesh. Next up, we've got Linda Sibiya to welcome on behalf of SAWIA and to address their involvement in EPR. Linda, over to you.
Thank you, Neil. Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to the organizers to invite Sawia to be part of this conversation. We are very pleased indeed to be invited. Sawia is, for those who don't know, is a body membership like Savia. We represent over 120 members who are developers, IPPs, OEMs, practitioners, etc. We are also entrusted with, as an industry body, we are entrusted as advocates for investment in wind power. We promote socio-economic development. We promote excellence operational practice in the wind power generation. We also play a pertinent role in just informing our members about the wind power market in general. We've been involved with the EPR since the regulation was announced last year, and we've discussed our approach or the legislation implication with a number of stakeholders, and amongst also within Sawia itself, also through to the board, as well as through our various working groups that we have. And we've decided to place the EPR issues on one of the working groups. We call it manufacturers and local content, because we believe that the working group would be able to adequately address the issues of the EPR. We do have other working groups which also have interest in the EPR. We have environmental working group. We also have assets working groups where all the IPP are sitting. We've responded to the calls for comments when last year when it was still DEFT, and we've indicated our intricacies as a wind sector, and we believe that such sessions will always be useful to us in terms of giving us some more insight, some more information, and giving us directions to areas that we are still not sure in terms of how we handle within this EPR regulation. So here we'd like to sit and participate and ask questions and make sure that we fit into our processes internally, so that at the end of the day, we make informed decisions, and we also support the department in its endeavors to implement this regulation. And as we are part of the renewables energy industry, I think the objectives of EPR lives through our genes as an industry player. So I think with that, I would welcome all our members that have participated in this call, and please feel free to ask any questions at the end and engage with the experts as they are here, so that at the end of the day, we can contribute effectively to our own development in the EPR program. Thank you, Chair.
Linda, thank you. Always good to have you on these calls. Thank you very much for your time. And now it gives me great pleasure to welcome Michelle Governor, the Chief Director, Hazardous Waste and Management and Licensing from the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment, who will be addressing the topic of extended producer policy scheme regulations. Michelle, It's always great to engage with you. Thank you so much for making time to be here today. And over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil, and good afternoon to all my colleagues on the panel and to all the attendees of the session. I think I'm no stranger to this. We have been down this road. I think this is now the 4th time. So you should actually know what I'm going to say even better than I'm going to say it. So I'm hoping you can all see my screen, and I am
see.
Onto, thanks, Neil. I'm going to put that onto slideshow so that I could then talk through this. Okay, so this is another go at extended producer responsibility regulations. The regulations, let me just give you a bit of background before getting to the regulations and really getting into the meat of things. So this process actually started in 2011 or thereabouts when we started working on the National Waste Management Strategy. It's taken on different forms, but eventually in December 2019, the department embarked on a process to implement EPR as is captured within Section 18 of the National Environmental Management Waste Act itself. Subsequent to that process starting in 2019, there was extensive consultation, which basically then resulted in the EPR regulations and notices for electronic and electrical equipment, lighting, as well as paper and packaging sectors being published on the 5th of May for implementation. So it's a fairly new set of regulations. Now, this basically is a slide which indicates the content of the regulations. I'll go through some of the definitions, and remember this presentation's not completely exhaustive. There are things that I've taken to highlight the importance of this aspect. And hence, I'll look at some definitions. I'll look at what the purpose of these regulations are, who it applies to, how producers and PROs will need to register, what are those measures that we expect to be implemented, what are the obligations of the parties, what's the minimum criteria, what are the financial arrangements, what do we as the department expect from a monitoring, reporting, and evaluation perspective, what is the performance review of this scheme, what does it entail? Then we'll look at some offenses and penalties. So going into the definition, some of the definitions that we've captured here is brand owner, for example, which means a category of person or persons or company who makes or sells any identified product under a brand label. Free rider means a firm or individual who benefits from the actions or efforts from another in relation to the EPR scheme without actually fully complying with the requirements of the scheme itself. And this is something we want to stop. We want everybody to actually be responsible for what is happening within the scheme. We've captured definitions like importer to mean persons or category of persons bringing identified products into the country from abroad. And it includes, but is not limited to those people actually putting this equipment on the market for sale. A producer is one who manufactures this product, may be responsible for conversion or refurbishment, or import of new or used products as identified in terms of the notices under Section 18(1). Collection means gathering of identified products at the end of their lives at its place where it's generated, or storage by a waste picker, collector, or reclaimer, or even a service provider. So full cost means all of the direct, fixed, and variable costs associated with the scheme. Identified products, again, are what is been captured within Section 18. And net cost means the full cost subtracting the revenue from the sales of collected material, and that's how you get your net cost. Refurbishment basically means restoring old products to a working condition, which must be available for reuse and which restores its original function. I think that's an important one. All right, so what is the purpose of these regulations? So what we did is we developed these regulations to provide for a framework within which producers could develop an extended producer responsibility scheme. The second reason we developed this is we want effective and efficient management of identified products at the end of its life cycle, and to encourage circularity within our space so that products do not end up on landfills and thereby are wasted. So who does this act, do these regulations apply to? It applies to, and what does it apply to? It applies to all identified products in terms of the notices. It applies to products that were placed on the market prior to these regulations coming into effect. So those that have been identified in the notice, but have been in the market long before these. Those are covered within these regulations. And this is to deal with the historical stockpiles that may exist. There's an exclusion. These regulations do not apply to identified products that are made specifically for export purposes. So if it is being made purely for export, then these regulations don't apply. In terms of registration, existing PROs must register by the 5th of November, 2021. New producers must register within 3 months of establishment, and registration occurs electronically through the South African Waste Information Center. And as one of our panel members here would indicate, he finished it in 8 minutes. So we're saying that that it takes 10 minutes to complete. If it's taking more than 10 minutes, there is a problem. So just look at that. It is a very smooth process, and you will get your registration number at the end of that process. What are those EPR measures that we are expecting from producers? Firstly, we're saying that the producer or of a product or class of products must establish and implement an EPR scheme, or join another scheme, or appoint a PRO to establish and implement a scheme on their behalf. But we want to emphasize that this must include the entire value chain in the scheme itself. And the producer then will be accountable for the operation and performance of that EPR scheme. The producer must conduct a life cycle assessment within 5 years of implementation of the scheme. And through this life cycle assessment, these are the minimum focal areas that we're talking about. So it's not a fully fledged life cycle assessment in the truest sense of that concept, but we want to understand how exactly material is minimized, in terms of the identified product. So basically designing for maximum recyclability, design for reuse, recycling, recovery, without obviously compromising the functionality of that product, and reduce the toxicity of whatever materials are going into the product, so that the resulting waste stream is also of a lower toxic nature. We expect that there must be collaboration from the producers with the Department of Trade and Industry or Trade, Industry and Competition to develop a broad-based economic empowerment transformation charter that's within 2 years of publishing the notice. And this entire slide is basically talking about transformation generally. We're looking for, in implementing these schemes, that there be a focus, a special focus on women, youth, and people living with disabilities. Where specified, there must be mandatory takebacks in the notices. Environmental labeling must be identified and must be implemented within 3 years of these schemes coming into effect. In terms of a scheme that's operated by a PRO, we're saying that that scheme, the producer responsibility organization, must develop and maintain a system to collect fees. It must maintain a register of its members, conduct internal and external audits, which must be submitted to the department, must be loaded onto SAWIC. We expect that there must be data collected, and we expect that there must be contracts, contracting with downstream value chain for services needed, and that contracting must be a transparent process. The producer that develops their own scheme. So as I indicated up front, there are three options. And if the producer chooses to go on its own, they must then allocate funding for implementation of the scheme. They must conduct internal and external financial audits and make them available to the department and maintain data and report on this to the department. So what is needed here is that for both the PROs and producers, they must cooperate with all the municipalities where applicable within 3 years of implementation of the scheme. And this is to increase the recovery of identified products from the municipal waste stream. So here we expect that there will be an integration of informal waste pickers, reclaimers, and into this value chain. We expect that there must be development of a secondary market. That's the only way we're going to ensure that the recycled content actually gets used and does not end up lying around. So it must, if there is no market for it, nobody's going to do it. We expect that you use existing and new infrastructure across the country where applicable, in terms of ensuring that these schemes operate, compensate the informal sector, the waste pickers or specifically perform an environmental service, and we've built that into the regulations, and this must be implemented by November next year. So essentially, again, transform the sector is what we're saying. These are the things that need to be taken into consideration in fee development. The weight of the product, the ease of recyclability, the current demand for the material for recycling purposes, the costs for establishing a collection system, administrative costs, costs for public communication and awareness. So these are all the costs that actually need to be factored into the scheme. In a PRO established scheme, the PRO must determine that fee together with its members. And we're saying that the fee must be applied proportionally across the board. And this would be based on the quantity and the identified products that are placed on the market. And then the fee itself must be publicly available on the PRO's website. The admin cost of the scheme will be limited to the following in terms of salaries, overhead costs, and IT systems. From an admin cost perspective, we've indicated that in the first year of setup, your admin costs should not exceed 20% of the revenue collected in calendar 1. And then in calendar year 2, we're expecting that those admin costs should decrease. And again, in the third year, we expect that it should be reduced further. And this is to ensure that the maximum amount of money from that fee actually goes into the recycling aspect and reuse. If a producer establishes their own scheme, they must determine and allocate appropriate funding and resources to be able to implement a scheme. In terms of the fee itself, the EPR fee, it must be equal to the costs for establishing a collection system, collection, transport, treatment cost, admin cost. Again, I've raised this communication and awareness, surveillance systems, so basically auditing and this would be subtracted from the revenue of the material sales. In a producer established scheme, the fee must be publicly available on the producer's website so that there's a knowledge out there of how much is being put aside for this particular scheme. The producer that establishes and implements their own scheme must submit to the department an annual financial plan and budget for the scheme. The annual financial plan must include as a minimum the allocation, the manner in which the fee is calculated, and the total amount of contributions that cover the net cost of the obligations of the producer applying for registration. In terms of Section 8, this talks about monitoring and evaluation. We expect an interim performance report against the targets, and this is needs to be submitted to the department by July every year. So July 2022, we're expecting the first interim performance report for the schemes that are currently being set up. And the focus area is basically when we're looking at unaudited performance in terms of performance itself against the targets, in terms of the breakdown of allocation of the fee and all finance matters, so that we have a handle on what is working, what is not working, so that we could intervene early on. And then again, in terms of Section 8, the annual performance audit reports must be submitted to the department within 3 months of the conclusion of the calendar year. So the calendar year ends on 31st of December. So by 31st of March, we expect those annual performance audit reports to be submitted to the department. And they must indicate performance against the targets, a breakdown of the fee, performance on all financial matters, a governance report, and as well as a number of jobs that have been created. Now, producer responsibility organizations as well as producers must, as a minimum, this is now again with reporting, they must report the quantities of identified product that are placed on the market, what is diverted, what is exported, what is landfilled, and the number of jobs created in the process. From a performance review point of view, performance of the scheme will be reviewed at a 5-year interval, but the department can at any time review the scheme based on its performance, or the PRO or producer may then approach the department for an earlier review, either due to non-achievement or overachievement or some other aspect that might be happening. In terms of criteria for a PRO, we have said it must be an autonomous body, which is established by producers through a due process. It must be a not-for-profit company, must be managed by a board of directors, and which is comprised of representatives from producers. And it must adhere to the Companies Act in terms of good corporate governance and management of conflict of interest. Now, this slide looks very busy, but basically what it's saying is if you don't register, it's an offense. If you don't comply, and when I say you, I mean either a producer or a PRO in this space, if the minimum requirements are not implemented, it's an offense. If you don't implement the measures, the EPR measures, the fee issues, the monitoring and evaluation, these are all offenses. And these offenses then come with penalties. And the penalties is that if a person is convicted of an offense under these regulations, that person or company or facility may be imprisoned for a period not exceeding 15 years. Or an appropriate fine, or both a fine and imprisonment. And further, a registered producer who doesn't comply with these regulations may have their registration revoked and may be forced to join another scheme. And the same with a PRO, the same with a producer. So these are the penalties that have been levied. In terms of the notices, like I indicated in my introduction, there are 3 notices at the moment. We're looking at electrical and electronic waste, packaging and paper and packaging, as well as lighting waste. Now, in those notices, there's some new definitions that have been included. Some definitions have been clarified because there was some confusion. We've, for example, on the E and lighting, we've got mandatory take back, which was included, and we've got refined targets in terms of what is expected under the EPR scheme. And that, I think, is in a nutshell what the regulations are all about. But as I've indicated to you previously, we are here to discuss, we are here to clarify requirements. So please do ask those questions so that you are clear on what the expectation is. And while we have not yet put out a notice that is specific to the renewable sector, it is something that is coming. Because I'm going to be quite blunt, we cannot have, for example, Lindo, wind turbines lying all over the show or having a massive dump for that. There has to be something done. And that is why I'm applauding the renewable sector for actually taking the initiative and trying to understand what the requirements are in this regard. Thank you. I'll stop there.
Michelle, thank you so much for that. You're getting quite good at this now, huh? Well done. And Linda, that wasn't an attack on you, so no need to comment. But I think the point, Michelle, is that everybody's getting together. We're all rallying around this issue, and that's what it's about. It's about conversation and the next step. So thank you so much, Michelle. I'd just like to make a point, please, to all delegates, please ignore any comments made on the chat function regarding the vaccine. It is not the view of the organizer or the sponsor. So please just ignore those comments. Thank you. Our next speaker, covering the topic of extended producer policy scheme implementation and organizational roles and responsibilities, is Patricia Schroeder. Patricia is the founder and director of Urban Elements. Patricia, I know that you've put a lot of work into this, so thank you for that. And over to you. Patricia?
Hi, I'm just getting my screen sorted. Can you see the screen?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much, Patricia.
Okay. Well, firstly, welcome to all the participants. It's good to have turnout like this and to share the information today, and thank the organizers for putting this together and everybody that is participating and is presenting today. So I'm going to, there might be some points that are repeated from Michelle's presentation, but I will speak a little bit more around those points in terms of the producer and PRO responsibilities. So to start on the regulations, there were two, there was one overarching regulation published, which was the Section 18 EPR regulation, which covers the entire all sectors in South Africa, and it can apply to any product or any sector within South Africa. And then there were specific notices at the time that were issued, as Michelle mentioned, for paper and packaging, for lighting, and for electrical and electronic equipment. Now, in this case, the EEE notice is applicable, and what that notice stipulates is how the implementation will be done, the products and the class of products that are identified, and it also sets targets. But both the notice and the overarching EPR regulations need to be complied with, so that's an important point. And then just to go into a quick definition, which Michelle's already covered, The producer is any person or category or persons or brand owner who is engaged in the commercial, manufacture, conversion, refurbishment, or import of a new product. And the brand owner is a person or category of persons or company who sells any product under a registered brand label. So I just wanted to confirm that, because there seems to be a lot of uncertainty around those definitions. Then in terms of an extended producer responsibility term, what is EPR? It means a producer's responsibility for their product is extended to the post-consumer stage of products or components and their specific life cycles. And it is a policy approach under which producers are given the end-of-life financial and operational management responsibility via a PRO for their products put on market. So this mainly involves a take-back scheme of post-consumer products for the collection, transportation, repair, refurbishment, management, and treatment of those products. Assigning such responsibility could in principle provide incentives to prevent waste going to landfill. It will promote environmental protection and support the achievement of consumer recycling and materials management goals. It further extends to beneficiation opportunities, innovation, skills development, and job creation. And then, of course, there's this term free rider, which is a big concern for a lot of the compliant producers. This means a firm or individual who benefits from the actions or efforts from another in relation to EPR, in relation to the EPR scheme, without sharing the obligations and the costs. So those would be, in other words, your non-compliant producers. So in terms of the EE notice, they are identified products, and this means the products that are identified within the notice and falls under a mandatory take-back scheme. So the product or class of products to which the extended producer responsibility applies to, and this is from the Act or from the notice, is as listed there: large equipment with an external dimension more than 100 centimeters, medium equipment, which is any external dimension between 50 and 100 centimeters, and then small equipment with no external dimension more than 50 centimeters, and batteries. And in this case, when we say batteries, it excludes portable batteries and lead acid batteries, but it includes all other battery types under the scheme. Then in terms of the targets in the e-notice, this is the targets that have been established over a 5-year period. And you can see there from year 1 to 5, there is an increase in the tons per year that need to be achieved. So in year 1 would be 36,000, up to year 5 would be 103,000 tons. And obviously over this period of time, one would have to review these targets to see what the actuals are, but these targets are set at this point in time because currently the targets for EEE recycling and collection are it's really low. So a lot of work needs to be done and a lot of improvement is needed. So who is obligated under the EPR regulations? So if you look at this diagram here, if any of the answers to any of those blocks is yes, then you have producer obligations. So you need to ask yourself the question, do you import electrical and electronic equipment on a professional basis into South Africa? Do you manufacture or sell e-equipment under your own brand? Do you refurbish E and sell this under your own brand? Or do you under your own brand sell E produced by other suppliers? And then do you sell via distance communication as a method like internet phone catalog or online systems to consumers and businesses in South Africa, but are based outside of South Africa? then if any of those answers are yes, then you have an EPR obligation. And then in the caveat there is, for avoidance of doubt, if companies place electrical and electronic equipment on the South African market, then they must take on the producer obligations under EPR regulations. And then a very important note to take to be aware of, that the packaging of the electronic and electrical equipment is also an identified product under the paper and packaging notice, and therefore is also subject to EPR. So if your product is imported or put on market in packaging, that is also subject to EPR and would then fall under the paper and packaging notice. So what are the options for the renewable energy sector? So as it was stated in the regulations, that a producer must, within 6 months from the 5th of May this year, by the 4th of November, because one needs to be compliant by the 5th. So by the 4th of November, establish or join a producer responsibility organization, and who must develop and submit an EPR scheme according to the EPR responsibility regulations to the department. And then develop and submit an extended producer responsibility scheme implementation and plan. It's a bit of a tongue twister, according to the EPR regulations, and that must be submitted to the department by the 4th of November. So what is the sector's options here? And these options are to either, and I'm talking about the renewable energy sector, so these options are either to establish a joint renewable energy PRO, so a joint PRO for all solar, wind and storage, or each sector establishes its own PRO, so in other words, one for wind, one for solar, one for storage, but that is hugely complicated and expensive, or join an existing PRO. So these are the options that need to be considered by the different sectors attending here today, on which is the best way forward. And you need to have these discussions offline to make those decisions. So what are the responsibilities of a producer? So we've already said to join or form a PRO, and which assists and helps determine the EPR fees and draft the implementation plan that needs to be submitted to the department. So with the assistance of the PRO, the producers can achieve this goal. To regularly and accurately declare production or sales of your products by equipment and equipment by type, in mass or tons, as required to the PRO, and then also to declare the product packaging materials. The producers also need to finance the PRO administration and activities through established EPR fee contributions based on production or sales of identified products listed in the notice. And Michelle ran through where all of those fees will be allocated. The producer, however, remains accountable for performance in terms of the agreed targets and compliance with the regulations. And the producer must review its portfolio of products using design for recycling guidelines to align with any mandatory or recommended changes, reduce unnecessary consumption, and increase recyclability. And the PRO will assist producers with the life cycle analysis of products, which the regulations call for as well. And then producers must also implement compliant labeling standards set out in SANS 1421 and 1424, and submit annual audits by independent third parties via the PRO in order to verify consumption or production of light. So I see there it's got lighting products, but it's triple E products and financial obligation compliance. So all of these activities here is done as a joint effort between the producers and the PRO of their choice. So again, just to explain, what is a producer, what is a PRO or a producer responsibility organization? It is a non-profit company that is established by producers operating in any of the industrial sectors or waste streams covered in the notice to support the implementation of the industry Section 18 scheme. And the board must only consist of producers. It is an organization that assists all South African producers in the obligated sector to meet the extended producer responsibility targets through various key stakeholders within the value chain on a national basis. And the PRO is responsible for setting up and managing the value chain mechanisms for the targeted waste material, and to create awareness for the recycling of all lighting and electronic waste on behalf of its producer members. So if you have a look at that, if you have a look at this diagram here, it really encompasses with the PRO in the middle or in central to all of these activities. And this is what the PRO is responsible for on behalf, acting as an agent on behalf of its producer members. So one of the most important things I want to highlight is PRO governance, and there has to be excellence in PRO governance. This is so important. I cannot stress that enough. And the reason for this is so as to establish the EPR funds accurately and responsibly, whilst protecting the confidentiality of its producer members' data using local, independent and trusted mechanisms. It is critical to ensuring a level playing field for all stakeholders involved. And it also is critical for adequate control systems to ensure governance is effective and appropriate, and ensures the identification and reporting of external and internal free riders. Now, just to break down the difference between the internal and external free riders. So your external free riders are the companies that refuse to comply and don't register with a scheme or with a PRO or with a department. So those are your non-compliant producers as an external free rider. And then internal free riders will be producers that misrepresent the amount of products they bring in or the type of products, so they do not declare accurately what they put on market, and that needs to be identified, and those are known as internal free riders. And as you can see, the diagram there basically encompasses all of the measures needed for good governance within a producer responsibility organization. Then in terms of audit requirements, Michelle ran through the timelines of when the reports are due and what the regulations call for. But in terms of the producers and PROs, what are these requirements? So the PRO establishes the PRO audit requirements for internal and external audits aligned to all applicable regulations. So the audits will be conducted by professionals or entities with a relevant expertise to conduct audits with respect to the following, and these will be independent parties. For the PRO and producers, there will be producer audits, in other words, to verify producer data in terms of product declarations and volumes. There'll be financial audits so that EPR fee collection and allocation can be checked and reported on. And then, of course, the end-of-life product management and target verification needs to be verified by audits as well. Then in terms of the other side of the chain is the waste management providers and suppliers. There will be compliance audits and data verification by independent parties. The waste volumes that are collected, transported, and recycled need to be verified via various audits. And then end-of-life product management and target verification will need to be audited as well. Then in terms of the audit process itself, the PRO would to ensure that you have accurate checks and balances. There would need to be internal audits done within the PRO, which will be performed by an internal auditor. It would be reported to the management and the board of directors of the non-profit company, and it will assess and improve internal controls. And it's normally voluntary, scheduled by the PRO management, versus the external audit, which the internal audit would underpin, is performed by independent professionals or entities. It's reported to third parties such as the regulators and producer members, and it confirms that the company is following all applicable regulations, and it's required of certain companies to produce these reports, and it's involuntary. So the regulations really call for the external audits as a must, and when we combine these two, we know that it provides assurance. You can get an accurate auditor's report out of it, and it communicates any issues that have been identified in the process that can be addressed and corrected. So in terms of the PRO, the all actors approach for implementation is recommended. And this is one of the best models globally that is used by producer responsibility organizations, and it has found to be very, very successful. So it is advised to use this approach. So this is your PRO that would have a relationship with the national authority in terms of working together with them around EPR compliance and reporting. And then you have in this green box over here, you have all your stakeholders that are a key part of the EPR scheme and for its implementation. And that would include municipalities, retailers and distributors, the consumers, collectors of the waste or collection facilities, collection points, the transporters that would transport the waste to the treatment and recycling facilities, and then of course the treatment and recyclers themselves. So all of these actors here are important, and they would become advisory members, which would work closely with the PRO to ensure that that there is good compliance and that the targets are being met. So all of these actors are needed to secure good governance and good EPR target outcomes at the end of the day. Then the EPR responsibilities of a PRO, and it's not limited to these few that I have here. It does go into a bit more detail, but I've just highlighted the most important ones. So the PRO legally accepts the EPR of its member producers for the electrical and electronic equipment products for which it operates, and the EPR scheme implementation. The EPR scheme is a set of actions that a producer and PRO, and that's very important, that both implements to address the requirements as set out in the regulations. So if we have a look at the diagram on the right here, these are some of the most important activities. So the PRO and on behalf of its producer members would fund the recycling value chain to increase capacity, collection, compliance, recycling, including legacy waste. Secondly, to develop end-use markets for recycled materials and to stimulate the demand for those secondary materials that are recovered. To develop guidelines and drive better product design within its membership. So that forms part of the life cycle assessment as well. And then to educate consumers to encourage separation at source where possible and collection and environmentally sound recycling. To accurately measure and report on the market, collection and recycling to the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, and then one of the most important is to use the EPR funds responsibly and effectively on behalf of its producer members. So those are the key elements that that's been extracted, but there is a lot more involved in the responsibilities of the PRO. So the primary measure of the effectiveness of a PRO is the percentage of products collected for recycling. So when you know, I've shown you the targets. So the targets is the primary measure of effectiveness. So ultimately, the producer remains legally responsible and liable for the EPR scheme performance of its chosen PRO. So Michelle mentioned registering with the department. There has not been many registrations from what we can see. So we encourage everybody to register with the department because that would be the first step. And there's the link to register yourself as a producer, and you need to register to be compliant, and the department will issue a producer registration number to you. And this is an example of the type of notification that you will receive once you have registered with the department. So one would need this registration number to issue to the PRO that you join as well, so so that the PRO can ensure that you have performed this step in compliance. Then in conclusion, I'm going to just speak quickly about the EPR and the PRO summary. The PRO will have a vital role in assisting electrical and electronic equipment producers to identify shared constraints and synergistic opportunities. Along with stronger collaboration across the value chain, a mind shift will be needed not only for legislative compliance, but also for the benefit of the consumer and the environment. EPR is new to South Africa, so it requires a change, it requires a mindset shift, and we need to keep that in mind and act upon that. Intensive consumer awareness campaigns by the PRO will also help to drive behavior change, and EPR will see an investment in collection, treatment infrastructure, providing a concerted recovery effort and recovery of reusable resources, and of course to avoid products going to landfill. So to the very last point, the EPR will be about the journey and not the destination, and it must be a joint effort of all producers. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions later. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Patricia. There was a lot of information in there. And what's great is that we're recording this webinar. So if you missed anything, you can go back and watch it again. It will be on the Solar Power Africa website, but we'll also send it directly to all delegates. Now to address you, we have Keith Anderson, who will introduce the E-Waste Association of South Africa and the work they do. Keith, good to have you. Thanks for all your efforts, and over to you.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
We can see. Thanks, Keith.
Okay. Right. Thanks very much for the opportunity, and good afternoon to all. EWASA is the E-Waste Association of South Africa, and we're a registered PRO. So what you've been hearing for the last 20-30 minutes or so from Michelle and Patricia, and particularly on the regulations. So the regulations is what has to be done. And when you boil that all down and you turn it into practicality, that's what the PRO does. We turn the regulations into practical implementation. In other words, the regulations is what must be done, and the PRO is how it's going to be done. Have you moved to the next slide? Can you see the next slide? I want to make sure that you've got it right.
Keith, Neil,
Yeah.
just put it on full screen. and then go from slide to slide. We still see your opening slide.
You're not onto the next slide.
No.
Okay. And now?
No, still the same slide. Are you on two screens? Have you got two
No.
screens there? Just the one. Okay, just try put it on full screen.
Yeah,
to go on full screen, sorry to interrupt, he would have to stop sharing, go on full screen, and then select share again.
Okay, I'm not sure what. Niels, do you want to pull up your my copy that you've got, and let's do it from there, because there seems to be some issue here. Hello?
Yes, I'm going to do that now for you. So will you stop share, and then I'll share from my side.
Okay. Stop share. Yeah, there you go. Okay, done it.
No, you're still sharing. There we go. Okay, now let's just find it. There we go. Share. And okay. Just right. Tell me when you're ready to move to the next slide.
Next slide.
I'll do that for you. Thanks, Keith.
Okay, next one. Right, so you saw this graph by Patricia. So we designed this because initially we were getting so many questions from people. Am I a producer? Do I need to comply? So we put up this flow chart, and it's made everyone's life a lot easier. I do want to highlight one point. If you go down to the last block, where it says, do you sell EE via distance communication, internet, phone catalog, etc., to consumers and businesses in South Africa, but are based outside of South Africa? Then currently there's a gap in the legislation. This has been raised with the department and is under review. So in other words, so if I'm sitting in Holland and I sell product through Take a Lot or One Day Only, I'm not covered by the.
We can't hear you.
Sorry?
We can't hear you, Keith.
Okay. I'm on maximum volume. Can you hear me now?
We can all hear him, Neil.
Can everyone hear me?
Keith, we can't hear. I think what we do is let's come back to you. We'll go to our next speaker, and then we'll come back to you. Will you just see if you can sort out your sound? Can you hear us?
I can hear him. I can hear him clearly on my side.
Yeah, we can also hear him, Neil.
Neil, I think you might be having an audio issue there. I think everybody else can hear.
Correct.
So I think, and Neil, let me just carry on. Everybody else can hear. If nobody else can, then they can just raise a point so we don't get stuck. So I just want to come back to the slides. For that last block, there is a gap in the legislation, because currently, if you sell via distance selling into South Africa, you're not covered. And the reason why you're not covered is because in terms of the registration process with the Department of Environmental Affairs, is that only locally based registered companies can register. There isn't an allowance in the registration process for overseas based organizations. So there is a bit of a gap. It is a problem because, as I think most of you are aware, internet-based sales have increased. I think this year alone, 174%, and over the last 2 or 3 years in total, they're talking about 300+%. So it is becoming a challenge going forward, and it will create a problem because it's vast amounts of electric and electronic equipment that is being sold. Just go to the next slide, Neil. Yeah, so one of the things that that we can tell you from establishing a PRO system is you want to follow these 4 guidelines. In terms of responsibility, the manufacturers, the importers, the distributors need to commit to the recycling of their products and ensure that the recycling solution operates smoothly. It's really important, and that must be a collective effort. Simplicity. It's really important to ensure that consumers, traders, manufacturers, recyclers must easily understand the system, and they must be able to implement the proper treatment thereof simplistically. And you need to have the checks and balances from a reporting point of view. One of the challenges we've had in South Africa is because there's been no mandatory requirement for reporting, we've been guesstimating the volume of e-waste that's been put onto the market for the last 20 odd years. Now with the good news about the EPR regulations is there's an absolute requirement of mass material flow. So we'll now be able to start getting factual information and do factual reporting. That'll make a big difference. And then thirdly, reliability. It's really important to ensure that the reverse logistics that's managed by the PROs is completely independent. I think one of the previous speakers, Patricia, spoke about trustworthiness and control. Very, very important. We've already had one bad experience with a PRO in another waste sector some years ago. So we certainly don't want to repeat that. And then liquidity. Once again, recycling, we talk about in the regulations, they talk about net costs. So that's all your costs of setting up your recycling facility, the treatment of the products, less what you've sold the fractions for. So once you've recycled a laptop, for example, and it comes out the other side and you've got pieces of copper, silver, and so forth, those are called fractions, and those can be sold. So when we talk about the PRO and we talk about our take-back schemes, we talk about positive and negative fractions. So for example, if you cycle a laptop on average, what you could possibly recover from the fractions once you've recycled it would be higher than the cost of recycling. So that's a positive return. A negative return would be, for example, if you took maybe a PVR panel or an old CRT monitor and you recycled that. The cost of recycling that monitor versus the amount the value that you could get from the recovered lead would be negative. So that's where the EPR fee comes into play. It's there to incentivize recyclers to ensure they treat all products responsibly. Because as we know, uncomfortable as it might sound, recyclers have been operating for years and years and years in South Africa without an EPR fee. So the fee shouldn't be seen as just a way to top up their profitability, but it's there to educate, create awareness, but most importantly, incentivize those recyclers to invest, and it costs money to invest into the proper infrastructure that's required to treat product responsibly. You can go on to the next slide, please, Neil. So we established EWASA. I formed it in 2006 and then formally registered in 2008, and we've been going ever since. And one of the things I can tell you, so particularly for your members, when you decide which route you're going to go to join an existing PRO, form your own PRO, or do your own scheme worldwide, I forget the exact number now, but probably 96–97% of producers are members of PROs, simply because you get the economies of scale of being part of a wider audience. It's very costly to set up your own and manage and run your own scheme. So that's something that you should consider going forward. So, and I can tell you, when we formed EWASA in 2008, we really broke the mold, because traditionally, if you look across the world, you will find that historically PROs have been exclusively made up by producer members. But because it's South Africa, we've got a unique set of dynamics. And one of the mistakes that I think we make quite regularly in South Africa, and this is our personal view, is that we follow a Eurocentric model, and they try and overlay that into South Africa, and 9 times out of 10, it's a failure. So when we set up the association way back in 2008, we included the entire value chain from the get-go. Why? Because it's important for us to achieve the goals where we want to go. And now you can see the big drive. Michelle, in her presentation, was talking about empowerment and all the rest of it. It's vitally important that we get new players into the market, previous disadvantaged people, communities, and so forth, to solve the entire e-waste problem. So we've been working with that. And the other challenge that we're going to face you know, and this is where I have empathy for the department. We write the policy because you can sit and you can consult and you can engage as many stakeholders as you like. But you're never going to cover everything. It's because there's always something that comes out of the woodwork that you didn't think about before. So it's an ever-growing process. And that's what you have to, when you form your PRO, you need to set it up in such a way that you're able to adapt fairly quickly and continue to evolve over time. The other important thing from a PRO, whichever PRO that whichever PRO route you decide to go, is you need to ensure that that you've covered all aspects of the legislation, because the penalties are quite punitive and you don't want to go there and it's not necessary. But you also have to ensure that you engage with all parties. And there's a lot of things that the PRO has to do. And that's one of the reasons why, besides the cost, why producers prefer to form a PRO, because the PRO takes care of all the reporting, the public relations, the education and training, research and development, skill development, technology development, beneficiation, and so forth. And one of the other big challenges that we have also as a PRO, and with our members, and particularly the recyclers and the refurbishers, and that's why we've included them as part of our infrastructure from the get-go, is we've got to have a bit of a looking glass into the future and see what new technologies are coming down the line, and what's those technologies going to look like, and when they become end of life, what's it going to look like, and what's going to need to be treated. So if you take the electric vehicles, if you take photovoltaic panels and so forth, those are all, and all the renewable energy stuff. A lot of the recyclers, a number of the recyclers have been identifying that's coming down the pipeline, and they've set up themselves with infrastructure, invested lots of money into it. So once again, I'm proudly to say that from a proudly South African point of view, we have got recyclers who can start treating batteries, lithium batteries, the renewable energy components and so forth. So that's a big step forward for us. And that's one of the other things, as I said, we as a PRO have to continuously look at all these things to make sure we can give proper feedback back to the producers, and at the same time meeting the targets set by the department and so forth. Next slide. One of the important aspects too is that when you put together, whether you're going to put your own scheme together, or you're going to join a PRO, that scheme must cover the entire national footprint. You can't just say, I'm going to set up a scheme and I'm only going to treat my products in Gauteng, for example. That's not sustainable. So you have to make sure you have an infrastructure, and what you're looking at over there is a live map of EWASA and our membership across the country. So we've got a national membership made up of recyclers, refurbishers, dismantlers, collectors, transporters nationally. So you've got to bear that in mind, and how am I going to do that, and how am I going to engage with all these players in setting up your PRO. It's really important. The other important aspect, if you go to the next slide, Neil, is from a PRO perspective, PROs mustn't become these huge white elephants with fancy offices. And I mean, I've already heard of one board member of a PRO saying he's got no objection to paying lavish salaries and so forth. We've got to be very careful here. We're dealing with public money. And the inconvenient truth about EPR is, whilst yes, it says the producer pays or the polluter pays, but at the end of the day, the fact is the consumer pays. So we have a moral responsibility to ensure that we get the fee right, and getting that fee right is not easy. I can tell you there's many moving parts that go into establishing that fee. And one of the biggest things is, because it's a net-based fee, is offsetting the costs of the fractions that you sell. And all these fractions, the gold, the copper, the silver, the precious, the semi-precious metals and so forth, are all governed by the pricing on the London Metals Exchange. And they fluctuate tremendously. And in years past, there's points where the copper price has fallen off the charts. And all of a sudden, all recyclers start refusing to accept the product because there's just no value for it. So you've got to take all these factors and put them into play when you set up your scheme, how you're going to manage your scheme to make sure, because you don't want to set up a scheme and within 3 months' time, you've got no money to pay the recyclers. That can also be problematical. So it's not straightforward. It needs a lot of experience. Now, once again, I've been fortunate that I've traveled the world. I've met many PRO schemes. And had an opportunity to have a look at that. So I'll just put it out there. Just be cautious of how you put these things together, because it's not as straightforward as it is. Next slide, please. And just in summary, so the PROs play an enabling role that we've heard about, and that's just really important. And once again, what I failed to admit on the previous slide was that from a structural point of view, so we have got working committees that report directly to the board. So we have a working committee for consumer electronics. We've got a working committee for electric vehicle market. We will have a working committee for solar. We'll have a working committee for renewables and so forth. So to make sure that all parties retain their identities, but give us the information that we need as a board to make proper decisions. We have to collaborate across the complete value chain, as has already been mentioned, I think, in Patricia's slides. So we engage with municipalities, we engage with producers, we engage with recyclers, we engage with civil society, we engage with the Department of Environmental Affairs, because it's so important to get as wide a picture as is necessary to make an informed decision, because one of the things that we are guaranteed is there's going to come curveballs that we haven't necessarily thought through. EPR fee will see investment in the collection and recycling infrastructure. Right now, as I mentioned before, so we've got a national structure, but I can tell you the collection points that we've got throughout the country can quadruple to meet the demand going forward. There was also, we spoke about targets, and those targets are fairly low. They represent roughly about 10% of what's put on the market. And so if you look at the 30% year on year, it seems high, but it's off a very low base. So once again, at the end of the day, we don't know that, because as I mentioned, we've been making assumptions because we haven't had the facts. But now we'll start having the facts, and then we can make better informed decisions. So once again, the fee, in a perfect world, you want to see that fee that you use to apply across all facets of the treatment, but you want to see the number of tons recycled year on year increasing, and ultimately you want to see the cost per ton recycled material decrease. Then you know you're on the right track. But once again, I think so we could start off with a fee next year, theoretically, and ideally that fee should diminish slightly in the following year. But because this is the first time ever, and because we haven't had many factual documentation to work on, there might be a change there. But the goal is to make sure that the fee is reducing and the cost per ton is increasing. And I think the next slide is the finish one. So thanks very much for the opportunity, and I'll take any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keith. Sorry, I know I felt terrible to cut you a little bit short there, but we still have the other presenter. You've made a very powerful presentation, and these will all be shared with everybody later, and I think everybody needs to unpack it, and I'm sure you're going to be inundated, with questions and answers. So thank you very much for that. Our host, Neil, has unfortunately had to leave for a crisis. He wouldn't leave us for anything, so you must know this is a serious crisis. Our prayers go with him. And without further ado, I'd like to announce Longi, Kevin Robinson, and he is going to address us on the important topic of training within all of these programs and policies. Kevin?
Thanks, Joe, for that. And I think to start off, what I'd like to do is take everybody back in time. It's something that I was thinking about with regards to this topic specifically. And I remember as a young kid going around and collecting glass bottles from soft drinks. I won't mention the brand, but then taking them back to the shop and getting a deposit for the glass bottles. And about 2 years ago, I had the opportunity of speaking to somebody who's involved in the manufacturing process as an industrial engineer. And one of the questions I asked him was, we were having this discussion around around plastics and plastic waste and the entire life cycle cost of plastics. And I asked him, why is this, has there been this move away from glass into plastics? And his simple answer was plastic is cheap. And I think that is an important mindset with this recycling program, is to consider the full life cycle cost and not just focus on the cheap aspect. Considering the life cycle cost is important, and it has been mentioned before, this problem is a huge problem that is, I wouldn't say a problem, but a huge opportunity. It's a sleeping giant, and it is going to become more and more topical in the next few years. I think the first large-scale utility PV plants were installed in South Africa probably 8 to 10 years ago now. So in another 10 years' time, we're going to have quite a huge opportunity to start recycling solar panels. Why is this a problem in South Africa? Is that currently a lot of these modules do end up in landfills, unfortunately. The aluminium frames get taken off, and that's it. The rest goes into the landfill. And I think what's all important as this is that the manufacturers and consumers as well will now start to consider the entire life cycle cost of the product. It's not just the manufacturer will ship off a product and forget about it. So in terms of the why this is important specifically for solar, is that what I personally would like to see is starting to see a lot more focus on quality. This is some results from a study that was done by DuPont. DuPont are a materials manufacturer, and they do studies across a large number of power plants throughout the world. And what they start to find out is that there are a lot of different problems, and you can see there in this particular graph, just over 30% of solar panels have defects in them. And what's quite scary is that although the solar panels designed to last 25, 30 years, a lot of these problems start to manufacture in years 4 to 6. So it's a huge concern, even for people in the residential, commercial, industrial sectors as well. So we're hoping that with this kind of incentive or this program, manufacturers start to consider quality and the entire value chain throughout the lifetime. So the failures are real. And like I said, the hope is that manufacturers will start focusing on the quality aspects and communicating this with the end users. We know for a fact that in South Africa, 3 utility power plants have been replaced already. So already we've seen these kind of problems manifesting themselves in our own markets, and there actually are no mechanisms, or at that time were no mechanisms in place to manage the disposal. So a lot of these products either have to be put in landfills or to shipped overseas at quite a large cost in order to facilitate the recycling. So how do we go about this education process? I think already with the different market segments, there already is some kind of engagement. So with utility, people in the utility space, it is already in consideration in how to manage the recycling process at end of life. So part of your environmental impact assessments and decommissioning plans will have some kind of consideration around these. So we feel that in the utility sector, the training or then the information sharing with these kind of actors will be relatively simple, because it's something that's already in the mindset. With regards to industrial customers, once again, thinking specifically of mines, mines have quite a big focus on their end of life as well, because in the mining communities, they have to keep jobs, keep the community, move employees from the mining facilities into other areas. So once again, the end of life is quite an important aspect for them. So this is probably an easier sector to engage with. And I think where it starts to become a little bit more complicated is the commercial space and then residential space as well. So to a certain extent, some of the commercial large retail actors who have already installed solar, those will be a little bit easier to engage with. But there's going to have to be a lot of hard work with the installers and end users, as well as the residential sectors. And this is where the organizations become quite important. Sapphire, for example, has a green card program where they train installers with regards to the correct quality required in the installation process. So it's quite easy to incorporate these kind of trainings in future programs. However, we need to spend a lot more time and effort working with distributors through media campaigns and other mechanisms to try and ensure that the end users are informed of the processes that are being set up, ensure that they know the regulations, and they know how they can dispose of these modules. So I know we've got quite a short time, so I'm just going to end it there. It was a quick rush through some of the aspects that are under consideration. I mean, just to finish off, I think one of the other things is that, as Longi, we've already started to look at some of these things. Probably about 2 months ago already, there's been a lot of research into how to deal with the packaging aspects. So not only the products themselves, but looking at how the products are shipped and the waste material that is left on site once these solar panels are installed. So I think it's a great initiative to actually study and understand the life cycle costs and consider the entire value, not just the cost of the product itself once it's shipped to the customer. Joe, thanks. Back to you.
Wow, thanks, Kevin. That was really great. And it's awesome to see the thought processes that are really gone in from your side and from Longi's side. So we're trusting that you're going to provide some leadership for us and enable the other O&Ms and that to sort of follow suit. I sort of think there could really be this kind of club or collegiality between everybody, which I think is going to be brilliant. We're going to go to Q&A. And I think that what I need to maybe make clear is that, all these presentations have been very intensive. They've been very deep, and that there would be, obviously a lot of questions stemming from this, maybe that we can't address with here. So we will be engaging with everybody to share the webinars, to share the recordings, to share all these presentations. And then Safia, Saisa, and so we are going to sort of collectively have this working group. So we would encourage participation, because the working group would like to produce, better knowledge of ways forward as well. I think from a Q&A point of view, just quickly, because I don't want to ignore anybody that posted a question here, and I sort of had to leave them. Patricia, there was a question from Mark Williams on what do you mean by portable batteries? Patricia, are you still with us?
Hi, I started the video, but not the mute. So yes, so the portable batteries are your pen light type batteries. It's your household batteries. It's the ones that you put in your calculators and your remote controls and stuff. So that is what portable batteries are, and they are excluded from the EEE notice and the regulations at this point in time, because I understand that there will be a separate notice issued for portable batteries. Thanks.
Thanks, Patricia. And don't go away, because I think that class directed the question to you. So the next question is, if a producer or member of a PRO and pays the e-waste fees, how are the amounts he collected, recycled and recycled himself? So obviously outside of the PRO, for instance, through marketing programs, I should imagine, be treated. And will he get fees paid for these products back or part of it?
So if a producer registers with a PRO, the PRO takes ownership of the waste management activity. And in terms of the Environmental Waste Management Act, only licensed recyclers can collect and recycle those materials. You have to undergo, to get the licenses, and Michelle is head of licensing, one has to undergo various types of environmental impact assessments or basic assessments for the treatment site and facilities, and then a treatment license is issued. So it's not going to be possible because the compliance aspect will not be there. So the PRO would then determine and say, look, if you're not licensed to collect and recycle, then there won't be any funds disbursed for that. It has to be through the compliance system. I hope that answers that question. And I will see there was another one.
MOD was also on the portable batteries, but then I think you've sort of dealt with that. But I think maybe if you could just address her question, the actual EV car itself, would that be considered e-equipment? Because I think we've spoken about the portable batteries.
Yes. So portable batteries are excluded, and less lead acid batteries. So your typical standard vehicle lead acid batteries that you get on combustion engines, yes, those are excluded, but all other batteries, regardless, of where they're used, whether it's EV or whether it's storage for power generation or whatever, those are covered under this EE notice, yes.
Okay. And it seems you're popular on the batteries, so thank you for doing Sneeze's role. I'm going to come back to Mark's first question, but then his second one, are lithium batteries included in the definition of portable batteries or not?
Yes.
In other words, are they defined as alkaline chemistry only, or are you looking at the lithium?
It's all portables regardless of chemistry. So any portable battery, whether it's zinc carbon or alkaline or lithium ion or whatever, if it's a portable, and a portable is anything below 5 kilograms in weight, then that is considered excluded. Yes.
Okay, Mark, I'm going to come back to your question on the working groups sort of in our closing, because that would be, defining our way forward. So Patricia, if you could work on the answer to that, because we know we have the collective within the industry bodies, and how do we, also allow the external people to participate. I want to get to just some quick questions for Michelle, which are intriguing me. Michelle, if I can just get to them. Okay, is the EPR scheme itself, I'm going to give you a combined questions, and then maybe you can just talk as part of your closing, because in lieu of the time. Is your EPR scheme itself subjected to approval by your department? And what if you determine through all of this is the intention behind the EPR fee being publicly available? Because I think there's obviously a lot of stress, around those issues. And then just the fourth one, I'm just going to combine them if you don't mind, so that we can let you just answer one set of questions expediently. Why does reporting need to take place on an interim as well as an annual basis? We also concerned, because remember you were talking about the 10 minutes, and we want to see, is the administrative burden too much, to PROs, producers in the department? And that's it for you today, Michelle, because I have a whole lot more, but I think I'll let you off light. And if you can just address those for us, please.
Okay. Thanks, Joe. There's quite a few. Let me, and you will just let me know if I'm leaving something out. So the first question is, the department will not be approving any scheme. It would be the way Section 18 is developed in the Act. It doesn't allow for approval of a scheme per se, but we would need to understand what is in it. So, a submission of a plan or a scheme on what is in it would need to be made to the departments, because that would then allow us to determine whether the criteria we've set under, remember, sections 5, for example, are actually met. So you won't get any approval per se from the department that says you are a scheme or not. If you meet the criteria, then you automatically are a scheme. The second question regarding the interim reports, for example, and the administrative burden, I think this is something that we have looked at, and based on past experience, what we've said is that we need those interim reports, and we have made provision within our officials and our time within the department to look at that, because the bottom line is we don't want any scheme to fail, and this is our way of doing it. And as and when time goes by, and based on how the schemes are implemented, then we could reconsider potentially those conditions.
Yeah,
but
once it's running.
Yeah, once
Okay,
it's
then
up and running. Yeah.
Two, because I did bombard you. See if I can refresh you. One was the intention behind the EPR fee being, public available, and then I think also just listen to you on the reporting. What recourse does a PRO producer have? Because I mean, we have said this is new, and you said you're going to do the interim reports, and I understand the methodology behind that. But what if they're unable to meet the obligations? Because I mean, this is a sensitive area, and it's new ground for everyone. Although I know you've been lobbying this for many years, and you've had numerous workshops. I think we just have to bear condescendence. A lot of people are waking up now, and we need to sort of gently, take them by the hand and help them. So what support and what are your answers to that?
Okay, on the EPR fee, I think it's what we're trying to do out there is you and I as consumers out there, we want to know how, for example, the EPR is collected, how it's used. So a person buying the product, not necessarily the government authority per se. And that's why we're saying if the EPR fee is visible, it's out there, how it's calculated, how it's allocated, how it's used, then it gives consumers also the comfort to know that they're buying a product, for example, that has a responsibility attached to it. At the end of the day, that product is going to go into making something else. It's going to be into refurbishment, etc. So we want that to be known. We want consumers to be more educated and aware when they buy products, that they would rather look for the products that have EPR fees, assigned to it, so that they can buy then a product that is recyclable. So they could consciously do that. So that's why we're saying we want this EPR fee made public. And then on the last question, in terms of whether, if a scheme or if a PRO or producer says, well, we can't meet that obligation, don't tell us on the 29th of July when your report is due on the 31st. I mean, that's ridiculous. And you don't show any proof of whether you have tried. So rather we say, try and do this. If you don't come right, come back to us, talk to us and say, on this aspect, I did not come right because of this and this and this. I have tried X, Y, and Z, it does not work. And then liaise with us. We can talk, we can find a solution that achieves the same thing, that is in the regulations, but maybe just we have to be creative about it. So while the offenses are there and the penalties are scary, we're not out to get anybody. We're here to ensure that recyclable material does not end up on landfills. And that's where we're saying we need an indication of whether this is working or not. And the measures that have been included within the regulations are all built for that specific purpose. And so if there is genuinely an issue that you cannot, a PRO or a producer cannot achieve certain things, raise it with the department and make alternate arrangements. We could make arrangements, but like I said, show us that you've tried and you failed and not failed to try in the first place. And then we'll take it from there. Thanks, Joe.
Oh, Michelle, that was awesome. It's good to know that the department is actually there to help, and I think that we should all embrace that. And your sentiments are well received on that. Thank you very much for that, and I think thank you very much for all your participation today. Because we would would like to obviously wrap, and it has gone on over longer. We will be having a recession, of this once the working groups. Then, so I think Keith, I don't want to overlook you. You've got a lot to share, and I think from your presentation as well, we can unpack that into the working groups and the ways forward. I think let's hear from Patricia just very much in closing, because she is the chair of the combined industries, working group specifically focusing on that. Maybe she can give us some insights on how this, the working groups can create a little bit of inclusivity, further afield, so that we're actually addressing everybody. Michelle, if you could answer. I'm not Michelle, sorry, Patricia. If you could answer on it. Sorry, Michelle. You must think I'm targeting you. I'm Patricia, on the working group, please.
Yes, thank you, Joe. So the working groups have been the working groups have been established for each sector, and we have already established the combined focus group for EPR. So and it's a group of participants from the various sectors, external and OEMs are also members of the focus group. So those groups have already been formed. However, should there be any specific areas where we need expertise or external expertise, we will invite those experts or people with that type of expertise in to assist on that matter. I think that answers the question sufficiently.
Yes, I think that it's a path forward that we have to unpack, Patricia, and that's what it's all about. Is sort of collectives between all of us to see. So I think we need to unpack this further. And Patricia, you've made your email address available. I think we'll make a helpline and a hotline. I would also just like Michelle said that could contact the people need to reach out to the department if they're having issues. Maybe Michelle, if post this, you can just let us know the correct parties for people to approach, to access your department, because sometimes I think for the rest of us, we don't deal with the governmental department on a daily basis. It's a bit intimidating, so that we just know where to reach out. And then because I think everyone is tired, and this has been a very, very difficult conversation and a lot to absorb. And our panelists have done, the most amazing presentations. I do notice the questions here, Leon, Mark, the anonymous attendee. We will make sure that these are answered, that are put into a mail and distributed to all the attendees here and to a greater audience. And like Arnold says, we're going to be back. We will be back with more information, with strategies, with plans, and with inclusivity for South Africans, because it would be so great if South Africa could embrace this very, very important topic, which is very, very concerning. And we're hoping to see people like Kevin, I think it was from Longi, I'm sort of championing and leading, because we need the bigger guys to help the smaller entities also to get themselves up the value chain. So I would like to thank Mesa Frankfurt. Unfortunately, Niels is not here with us, but I would like to really thank them for this. It was really amazing putting this presentation together. There is going to be a part 2. We will announce when it is. And to my panelists, Michelle, Patricia, Keith, and everybody, Kevin, you were phenomenal. Thank you very much. And to the delegates that stayed on for the long haul, thank you very much. And then a big shout out to the industry bodies represented here, Sayisa, to Naveshan from Safia for caring and for sharing with us and participating and being willing to encourage this. And then to Linda from Sawia, thank you very much. And with that, I'll bid you all a happy afternoon and farewell.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks all.